Well, if you stand outside the United States in a Latin American country where they're producing the drugs, and you ask them, well, you know, why aren't you helping with the war on drugs? I mean, their viewpoint is, look, the problem is inside the United States. That's where the demand is. You know, we're poor people. We're not. Believe me, I'm not defending this posture. I'm trying to get to understanding it from a different viewpoint. It's really a demand problem. Now, some people respond to the demand problem by saying, well, we'll take the profit out of it, we'll legalize it. But when you ask the question, are the policies working, you have to respond with, well, what is driving the demand? Now, obviously, for those who are involved in distribution, it has to do with money and other things. So some of the policies can be directed to and may have an impact there. But the individuals who are buying and using the drugs, oftentimes people with plenty of resources and assets, what is it that they don't want to face in life? Why is it that they can't really, quote, govern themselves? Can the federal government really deal with that? No way. That is a deeper problem. Go back to the local area, to the family, to the institutions, all of those things. Washington may not make it worse, but it can't really solve that problem. And it really comes down to the question, you know, we are supposed to be a self-governing republic. But if too many individuals in a society refuse to properly govern themselves, what happens is increased force. It's unavoidable. The difficulty is there is no amount of force that can actually stop this. Therefore, what you have to do is engage in overuse of force to try to intimidate or, quote, deter others from doing it. That's not the kind of regime that we set up in this country. But if it comes to it that the American people, or a big enough segment of them, are unwilling, incapable of governing themselves, it is a threat to all of us. When I was in the DA's office, our solution was, at the beginning of all this, was to simply warehouse people. That is, take them off the streets, put them away for life. The difficulty is that when you get uniform policies, it's very difficult. I remember the day I walked into Harry Connick, the DA, and I said, Harry, I cannot put this guy away for life. It was a four-timer, when he has no record other than four-time arrest for the use of paregoric, stuff they put on teeth for children when they're teething. It is very difficult. It is a very complex problem. But what's happening at the national level, and you can see it at the end of the last Bush administration report on this, we're ratcheting the whole thing way up. And the last part of the report is about international efforts. And we're going to get a new international organization. There's going to be cooperation. Well, we've seen organizations like that in the past. We're talking about police actions. You know, if this is going to be ratcheted up to a global level, you're going to have global police forces, just the way the federal government came in and took more of the police responsibility away from local forces. It's going to be ratcheted up. I suggest we're going the wrong way.
Well, I'm glad you're not a DA anymore. There actually are some prosecutors in the room, and I'll let
the guy away for life?
Well, the fact of the matter is, as with the argument about the war and the argument about incarceration, these aren't true. Let me ask the people who are now prosecutors in the room. Do you lock up many first-time nonviolent drug possession offenders who aren't arrested for more violent crime that you may knock down to a possession offense? If you want to look at who's in jail today, yeah, there are too many people in jail. We're people who love our freedom. We don't want people to be denied their freedom. But the reason they're in jail is because they've primarily committed violent and repeat offenses of a serious nature. In fact, the reverse is true, as many of you know that work in law enforcement. We let people offend over and over and over again at the lower level because we don't want to put them in jail, both for money reasons and for societal reasons. And so we don't intervene where we should. Also, this picture of what law enforcement is ludicrous. Today, the single biggest cause of people getting into treatment in the United States as a whole is the criminal justice system and drug courts. we have changed the way the law enforcement system treats, doesn't warehouse, doesn't simply take people's freedom away. And we should be proud of that and stop talking like we didn't know that happened. In addition, the majority of the cases that you see in these areas are cases, and the discussion that's been made here, are cases that can be changed quite dramatically and quite rapidly, including drug use. In fact, in the past, I mean, think about if we were sitting here 5 years ago, what we'd be talking about with regard to meth, where some of you live. It was horrendous. What did we do? We passed local and then federal regulations on over-the-counter medications that stopped small toxic labs in most places dramatically. Meth use has dropped 60, 80%. That's a national solution. Now again, I like our freedom. I think the federal government's too big. I've spent time in administrations trying to whittle it down. But I do think there are things that have a national import, and distribution of drugs is one of those. And the argument about war here, this is silly. I didn't use the term war much. The first drug czar of the Obama administration announced at the beginning he ended the war on drugs. Not everybody got the memo, some on the panel. And let me correct, some of you are old enough to actually remember the history here, which I'm sorry, Professor, you didn't get right. It started in the Nixon administration, and the reason he used the word war was to show that it was a national priority of sufficient interest and resources and attention that it deserved the kind of attention that a threat from a foreign power would be. It wasn't to use tanks against our citizens. It was to get Americans to wake up and not be apathetic. Now that may have been a bad choice of words. It wasn't picked, I don't believe, by a PR firm. It was picked by people who brought you things like the war on poverty, which was not designed to use tanks against the poor. It was designed to say you got to pay attention to this as you would a serious threat to the future of our country. And we still need to pay attention. But the fact is, drug use has gone down. It's gone down because we have a lot of people, yes, at the local level, but at the federal level and at the international level. And what do people, well, actually, if you go to Latin American countries and talk to the people who are working on this in Colombia and Peru, and have done so for years, and in Mexico, they're pleased to help join with us effectively on reducing demand and supply. Colombia is a remarkable success story. Numbers just came out about how much the Colombians have reduced cultivation. We've had multiple pieces of evidence. I brought some of the material at the end of my administration. I don't know what the current administration is going to do with its drug strategy and what it sees, because I'm not in the government now. But remarkable decline in both meth and cocaine and some of the other drugs of abuse. We have a problem with things like prescription drugs, which is a different issue, that there are regulatory processes in place to try to start changing for the better as well. So it's not only, it's complex. You got to understand what you're doing. You got to get the facts right. I mean, that's kind of common human experience. But at the end of the day, you can make dramatic change for the better, and you can make dramatic change for the worse. And let me close with this comment on this round. My colleague, second to the left of me, his patron, as you may know, is spending an awful lot of time telling people they ought to legalize drugs. They ought to decriminalize drugs. He's funding organizations. He's put millions of dollars in that. They're free to do that. That's part of our freedom. But that signal, that undermining of a consensus, it undermines prevention, undermines treatment, undermines supply, and undermines the voices of people who are leaders who should be voices supporting progress and not reversal.
I believe there's blood in the water and a response.
Regarding
Professor Baker wants to respond, and then I want to respond.
Just a short one. Regarding the history, it was Barry Goldwater who first nationalized the crime issue in response to MAP and Miranda. Nixon then picked up with his war on crime. In 1970, we criminalized at the federal level marijuana. It has been a ratcheting up. Now, I don't blame Barry Goldwater, and I don't blame Nixon. I blame the Supreme Court, because what's happened is that in terms of dealing with local issues, people who didn't like the court decisions went, as they've always done on prohibition and everything else. They went for a national solution.
Okay. So far as legalizing drugs is concerned, I actually don't believe in that, and nor does anyone I know in the leadership of the institution for which I work. There are a number of people who believe in decriminalization of possession of small quantities of
Excuse me,
drugs.